Hey guys, it's Lan. I'm gonna get to Super Metroid in a little bit, but I wanted to share my thoughts on a certain game, and you're probably watching it right now. I'm probably gonna overlay video footage of me playing the game. As you can probably tell, I'm playing Metal Gear Solid 4. I got a PS3 last week, finally. But there's a few things that I wanted to cover for my first impressions of the game, and now what I'm basing it on my third playthrough. So I have gotten quite a bit of experience with the game. So let's see, here we go. The first thing that I wanted to mention was my only exposure to the game, besides seeing some gameplay footage, which really doesn't give you a whole lot of feedback. My first bit of exposure to the game came from Spoony One's review, quote unquote, more or less his thoughts on the game. I knew from the get-go that there is a little bit of a split in between people's opinions on the game. Some people think that the cutscenes are abusively long, that they think that the weapon system is completely ridiculous because you have so many weapons. They think that the game's a little bit too easy. And I will say, I did kind of agree with Spoony based on my previous experience with the Metal Gear franchise. Metal Gear Solids 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty easy games once you get the basic aspects of the stealth down and you realize just how stupid the guards are and what you can get away with. Now, there's some people that are a bit too cautious with the games, and they end up getting caught for being too cautious. They don't, like run right behind an enemy and CQC them like you're supposed to. They crawl, and then the guard turns around. The number one thing about the Metal Gear series that has always stood out is that you need to observe your enemies, and that's always going to be the case. Another thing that has stood out is the the movie-like cutscenes, and it does seem like a bit of a feature film. And when in brass tacks, when you cut out all the bullshit of Metal Gear Solid 4, it's about a 5.5-hour game. Now, some people will think, "Oh my God, that is ridiculous! I'm not going to buy the game." You know what? I've had full experience with the game now. Like I said, I'm on my third playthrough as we speak, and there is just so much about this game that I absolutely adore in comparison to the other MGS games. Granted, MGS 1, 2, and 3, and even the Twin Snakes remake on the GameCube were all great games, great storytelling. I think it probably sets the stage for putting story and actual emotion into the characters at the forefront. It was probably the first game that did that. You had the professional quality voice acting. Until then, it was your basic, cheesy voice acting from things like Resident Evil, the CDI games, as so many people like. So many things you see on YouTube poop now. Those all seem to come before Metal Gear Solid, which did set the stage for storytelling, good voice acting, and just an overall epic feel. Some people will say, games with good story but horrible gameplay tend to get passed over, and that is very true. Games with horrible story and good gameplay, well, people tend to not care if the gameplay is great. Sometimes they want a good story, but odds are they'll still play the game. You need to have good gameplay at the forefront, and Metal Gear Solid, all installments, deliver in spades in that department. They're all really fun to play. On top of that, having a really engrossing story. And I will admit, and there are going to be some spoilers, so if you want to turn the video off right now, go right ahead. But I'm going to admit that the storyline of Metal Gear Solid 2 started off good, and then got really, really convoluted at the very end of the game. I mean, you were starting off as this rookie soldier Raiden who only had experience with VR training. And in the end, it's this convoluted AI Patriots bullshit. Like, what the fuck did I just watch? And it's sort of like the opposite in Metal Gear Solid 4. The storyline is really, really twisting in the beginning. You're talking about all these labyrinthine aspects, cutscenes about the Patriots. But at about Act 3, and here's the spoilers, when Eva, aka Big Mama, tells you the whole story behind the Patriots, because a lot of people in Metal Gear Solid 3, because that was Kojima has always said, well, this is going to be the last Metal Gear Solid game, this is going to be the last Metal Gear Solid game. People felt cheated that in Metal Gear Solid 3 it was a bit of a prequel and that it didn't really explain anything. But based in the futuristic timeline of Metal Gear Solid 4. It explains everything. People are wondering who the Patriots are. They've been dead for 100 years, which is bullshit. They're a bunch of AIs. Well, the very core of the Patriots is, in fact, in the main cast of Metal Gear Solid 3. Big Boss, Major Zero, who is the quote-unquote founder of the Patriots. Paramedic, who is Dr. Clark, who worked on Gray Fox and was killed by Gray Fox, which I think is a bit of a retconning, because Dr. Clark, I believe, was called a male in Metal Gear Solid 1. I'm scratching my head in that department, but I don't know. And then, of course, we have Sigint, the DARPA chief, Donald Anderson. You know, you never got to hear Sigint's name. I mean, it says in the final closing moments of Metal Gear Solid 3 that Sigint forms ARPA. Well, okay, so we think that's the parent company of DARPA. Problem is, it doesn't fit too well with that, because Sigint seems like he's in his 30s, and I'm not sure exactly how that works with what his age is in Metal Gear Solid 1. I think he's supposed to be in his 50s or 60s. So that doesn't seem to stack up too well, but it does all tie everything together. And the fact that they did it in such a way that, as Spoony1 said, does make sense, makes me wonder if Kojima had planned this as a George Lucas from the very start, or if he said, let's work backwards from Metal Gear Solid 4's ending, find some crazy way to tie this all together, and it was a success. Everything worked out perfectly. The last two chapters of the game, the fourth one being Metal Gear Solid's atmosphere of Shadow Moses Island, since you go back, really great symbolism. Probably my favorite part of the entire game, when you go back to Shadow Moses and it's all old, decrepit. Everything that was once there when Snake went there the first time is basically gone. And you do explore the island in its entirety, minus a few side rooms that, like the commander's room. You can't go to the first floor basement of the Warhead facility. You only go to the second one. But so many flashbacks in that chapter just made you really sort of emotionally connect with Snake, and you're like, Jesus Christ, this guy is gonna die. And this is where we started. Well, most of us started for Snake, because the original two Metal Gears on the Nintendo were in fact not nearly as good as the original MSX games. So this was Metal Gear Solid 1 was pretty much our first real connection with Snake and how he had been screwed over so many times. And you're wondering, when does this guy get to have a piece of the end? And I'll admit, I really connected well with Chapter 4 of the story. Chapter 5 and the finality, finishing of everything, really good. They tied it all together. Big Boss is still alive, and and I'm curious how they managed to round up Solidus's body and then combine it with Liquid's parts to form the Big Boss doppelganger that you see in Chapter 3 that ends up getting burned. And why nobody could notice, why Snake couldn't notice through that plastic that was covering the vegetative corpse of Solidus with Liquid's parts grafted on. Why he couldn't notice that the wrong eye had been blown off, I'm not exactly sure, because the eye patch would be on the other side. Maybe maybe he'd forgotten which eye was which, but no, maybe not. But Big Boss coming back at the very end. This is the first time that we actually see Big Boss in the final moments of Metal Gear Solid. And it really does cause a bit of a closure, because you hear about all that stuff about how Big Boss was just really, really tyrannical in all the flashbacks of Metal Gear Solid. You see how sympathetic he is in Metal Gear Solid 3, but the fact that he had to kill the boss sort of hardened him up a little bit in Portable Ops, from what I've seen. It pretty much continues from there. But just him being able to bury the hatchet with Snake before he dies was just excellent ending. I mean, as storybook as it is, you know, you really gotta love it. The next thing that I'm going to say about the game is the fact that the gameplay is so much refined from Metal Gear Solid 3. I mean, there were so many things about the original Metal Gear Solid 3 that were wrong. Subsistence sort of tried to correct this. You know, the camera. Oh, the camera in Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence was a vast improvement over the original Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Not to mention the extra content, and that's something else I'm going to go into that this game seems to inherit from MGS3. MGS4 has so much content that you are literally going to be sitting there for hours and hours on end trying to round everything up. The game itself is short, as I said, but there's so much after your first playthrough of the game, so there's no BS storyline that you have to sit there through unless you like it, which I do, but you are going to have to skip it.